Please join me in welcoming David and Gregory Chudnovsky.
Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate this opportunity to address this audience. And it should be said that photography and art and computers present an example of similarity between of problems of art and science as manifested by the technologies employed in both of them.
Right. This particular talk actually will be evolving about of the subject of large-scale photography or large-scale computing. So, like always, one can say that science is like art like science. In this particular case, we are saying that photography is, in a sense, is like computing. And there are really, at least in the modern days, two approaches to making large-scale photography or image acquisition. One of them is serial and another is parallel. And it's very similar to the serial and parallel computing. In case of the serial image acquisition, basically you just do shots with one camera, then processes. So this can be almost seen as a human effort. And then there is the approach based on the parallel image acquisition. And it's fairly popular these days. It means that you have multiple collection devices like CCD devices. You might have even multiple optical devices. In this case, it goes under the category of adaptive optics. And it's very similar to what you can see now in the astronomy, whether you would like one single large telescope or you would like to have thousands little mirrors based on essentially bottle glass quality. You would still be able, at least theoretically, to get the same quality of the result. So this is the thing that happened in the computer world as well, whether one can run a single problem on a standard single-threaded chip, or you would be able to parallelize your problem completely and solve it this way. So in a sense, it's a fight between what we consider the John Henry approach, when a single human tried to do something, and multiple steam engines. So let's start with John Henry first.
Okay, so, and it might be surprising to you that we are pulling your leg, but there was certain George R. Lawrence of Chicago. And in the year 1900, you always have to acknowledge the prior art. Yes. And this is unbeatable prior art. He got money from a railroad company to make, in Chicago, Illinois, to make photographs of their trains. So camera, and so you can see here Mr. Lawrence standing next to the lens of the camera. Here he is. And it looks absolute Jules Verne. However, I assure you that he is really a famous American photographer. If you go to the Library of Congress website, and it's a serious website, you will get much more information on Mr. Lawrence, and I do believe that he deserves a book written about him. Anyway, let's be very brief and go to hardware side. The camera weighed 900 pounds. The film holder to the camera, which you see in the back, weighed 500 pounds. So the whole goodie weighed 1,400 pounds. It was manufactured by the Anderson camera company, which is still in operation, of Chicago, Illinois. The lenses, two lenses, they were using the Zeiss design, but they were manufactured by Bausch & Lomb Optical Company, which is still in Rochester, New York, upstate. And one had, it was a single lens, wide angle, 5.5 feet focal length. And the panoramic lens, which had the focal length of 10 feet, was used for photographing the
sorry.
For photographing, well, you stick here all this wireless network. No. Was used to photograph the trains. The film, the glass plate, was manufactured by Kramer Company of St. Louis, Missouri, and so was the film. However, here let us say, politics intruded. The Chicago Railroad Company wanted to make this picture because in the year 1900, there was a world exhibit in Paris. So they were singularly honored because the picture was exhibited in 3 pavilions, in U.S. Pavilion, Railroad Pavilion, and French National Pavilion. However, when the prince arrived to Paris, the jury and the government looked at it and said, we don't have cameras of this size. We don't have prints of this size. And it really smells like fraud. So the most prominent legal firm in Chicago was produced an affidavit testifying to the fact that it was okay. However, it was not kosher enough for the French government, and French dispatched the consul from New York to go to Chicago to inspect it and pass it. And only after that it was pronounced okay. So you would not, no. However, Lawrence did not stop in there. And here you see the aerial photograph of the same size. It's actually a panorama of the city of San Francisco in 1906, burned to the ground. I'm sure that if you zoom in, you enjoy it. Yeah. However, what is truly remarkable, that with very, if one counts the potential number of pixels, either on prints or on plates, which are in the Library of Congress, and we are doing it extremely conservatively, it will be more than 400 billion pixels. And now, more than 100 years later, we consider a billion pixel image to be a big one.
Right. So that's one way of solving the problem of taking really, really large images. But the other way, popular these days, it's parallel acquisition. So parallel acquisition means exactly that. You take multiple shots of the same object. Typically, it is an architectural landmark. And then you assemble it later into the giant picture. You also can use multiple images to create a 3D view, or 3D model rather, from multiple two-dimensional views. And this is an excellent project for the parallel computer. So that's how our little adventure starts.
So let me give you a little history, not too much. So uptown Manhattan sits between 10th and 12th century cloister monastery from the south of France, with John D. Rockefeller bought and brick by brick brought and reassembled in the upper side, the end, uptown Manhattan, on the land which he owned. And at some point, he also acquired 7 so-called unicorn tapestries, which are quite unique. There are 7 of them. 6 of them are whole, and the 7th is available only in fragments. He paid $1 million for this thing, which was in the possession of the La Rochefoucauld family. And they are beautiful pieces of gobelins manufactured in Belgium around 1500. There is no consensus and no idea who ordered them and who manufactured them, but they are beautiful pieces of art, the size of 14 by 12 feet, and depicting the hunt for the mystical unicorn. So you see medieval nobles with all their staff, dogs, horses, and all the rituals of hunt, who go out, hunt the unicorn, kill the unicorn, then it is brought to the chateau, and there it's mysteriously resuscitated and is shown in Captivity on the last of the 6th one, and this was the tapestry with which we dealt. In 1998, Matt took the tapestry down for restoration. It had been hanging there for, since the late 30s, and the back of the structure, which was supporting the tapestry, had worn out. So they took it down, they removed the cotton back, and then they washed it in deionized water, and they made the photos of the front and the back of the picture. And for this, they built, you understand, like 20 feet rig with a camera. It was a Leica camera with a digital back. And they made quite a few overlapping pieces of this mosaic photographing the unicorn, and made of these tiles, which were about 3 by 3 feet. It was captured, the native format was 16-bit RGB.
Right.
And while you could, when you look at it digitally, and they obviously didn't have the capability to look at the whole kit and caboodle in one fell swoop, it looked okay, but the attempts, multi-year attempts since '98, to put it together did not bring it, they were not successful. So we, by ignorance, were brought in and decided to take the project on, thinking that it would be tedious but not too dangerous.
Yeah, and in fact, the problem itself is actually very simple. The problem of a sample, that's why people do panoramic view for multiple images, because mathematics behind it is actually straightforward, nice and simple, and most of it was solved by a famous French mathematician Hermite in 50th, 19th century, just when photography was young. But believe me, idea of making giant photography from large pieces was already popular then. So he proved a series of theorems which basically states that even if you don't know the position of the camera, if you do, of course, it's much easier. It's called uncalibrated camera. But you have enough points of overlap, you would be able to reconstruct up to the scaling everything you want to know about the camera position, and thus create a panoramic view of for multiple tiles. So think how easy it should be. Why it is so easy? Well, if you think about the camera, right? Camera is depicted by its position in space, and zooming, another similar effect. Basically, it's 8 parameters. If you will throw out the fact that lenses possibly will even vary from shot to shot, you will add a couple of more parameters for the lens effect. Basically, it means that you need minimum 10 points to fit, and according to Hermite's theorem, if you just have 10 points, you might have singularity. So double the number of points, 20 points, you now have an excellent way of resolving the unknown position of the camera up to a scale, because you really don't know what was the scale of original object. So, but on the other hand, nobody cares in the photography about the scale these days. Anyway,
however, as you know, the devil is the details, and the details, we don't deal day in and day out with 500-some-year-old tapestries. We don't know the technology, and of course, one assumes that it's sort of a permanent artifact. It is not.
It is not.
It is a three-dimensional structure which actually is non-stationary. What does it mean? It changes with time.
It has no shape.
It is a collection of threads which breathe with humidity, temperature, and with the time which passes by.
Yeah. So what we want to show you here on this little thing is this little arrow shows you the displacement between 2 shots, one on the top of this overlap and one on the bottom. This is the overlap area. If everything would have been solid, so you're photographing the top and bottom of the wall, for example, you will see this arrow showing you the displacement, relative displacement of the camera would be all parallel, moving in the same direction.
Or moving at the same angle. But basically, what this vector field means, you have arrows where arrow shows the direction of displacement, and the size of the arrow shows the size of displacement.
Yes. So what's happening here is that the arrows go all over. In many places, they have consistent movement, but there's really no consistency in the whole image. So somehow, something was warped. And the term warped is actually very precise, if you wish, mathematical term, because the warping is not just occurring, in the soft material, but it's a standard mathematical technique. Mostly, these days, people recognize it from molecular biology, where warping means that you started with your ancestor's DNA, and as the mutation and so on progress, your DNA, his DNA will start changing into yours. It will be basically the same, but not quite.
Also, you can have, introns, you can have gene in several pieces where the thing in between is non-obviously useful. So you should be able to somehow rearrange and stick it up to get something meaningful.
Right.
It also is an old problem even before genetic matching. It comes in speech recognition, which was initially analog in, like 60 years ago. And there, we all say the same words, but we pronounce and produce them differently. So there are ways to align these things.
So what we want to show you is actually how exactly this warping occurred in the case of this unicorn tapestry. So on the left side, you see the piece of the overlap. So the thing which is a little bit brighter in the middle, it's a common area for the left and right shot.
You see A and B,
right.
This is the
pieces of,
say, overlapping tiles.
Right, so what you see here, you see on the left side you have a little bit darker. That's where you have on the left image. On the right, you have on the right image. In between is a common area. Now, watch carefully the A in the middle. You see what is happening? There is some slight movement. So let me explain you first of all what you're seeing. The tiling, it is actually literally tiling on what the unicorn tapestry was like.
It's a floor of a very big room where they washed it and it let it lie.
The white thing are the little pieces of white cardboard which were inserted under the unicorn so it would have a solid back. So when we saw this crazy picture with arrows, which was a result of some work, we asked guys from Met, did you actually touch the tapestry and moved it? And the answer was no. Photographers are not allowed to touch the tapestry, and they were right. Tapestry was not touched. What was touched instead is this little white board. And again, the reason is very simple. Tapestry, like we said, is non-stationary, has no shape. So the shots were taken over the period of weeks. So you make one shot, you move along, change the area, go to another. Well, you would like to have a straight surface underneath. The easiest way to manipulate the surface is to move a little bit this white board underneath. So watch it carefully in this area. The changes are literally in millimeters right here. Okay? But watch now what a result of these little changes makes on the part B of the unicorn. So, well, it makes sense. You pull a little bit material. Well, everywhere else goes away. If this would be solid, you see, again, look at the beautiful thing. So imagine it would be just solid thing, not a rug, but, like a canvas. Well, you just move a little bit canvas. It's equivalent to the moving of the camera. Hey, easy to compensate. That is not. That is something really bad. And what's worse about it, that there was so many tiles, and every time you walk around, the little white board was moved. So by the time you finish doing the circular pictures, the whole thing is complete.
Also, in addition to that, while the thing goes by and it months, humidity changes.
Yeah.
The thing breathes, light changes. So you are basically dealing with an attempt to reconstruct the surface of a very slowly flowing water, which is,
Right. So what's the technique used for this? Well, it's, again, very similar to what you do in biology. The only difference is that it's not one-dimensional substring matching, where it uses nice dynamic programming algorithm, but unfortunately a little bit more complicated. So first of all, if it would be one-dimensional problem, like voice or genetic, what you do, it's a very nice, simple problem known as the edit distance problem. So you have two sequences, AI and BI, and what you want to do is to match it in the best possible way, which means that what you want to minimize is an amount of disagreement between one string and another, and also amount of movement. Because obviously, if you allow or arrange it any which way you want, well, you can get anything from anything almost. So your movement is minimal, and your disagreement is minimal. And of course, you can do all sorts of variation. It's a standard dynamic programming algorithm which finds you the best solution, and it's reasonably inexpensive. It's only quadratic in the length. So you wouldn't do it for the whole genome of a person. You usually do it in pieces, but it's okay. Unfortunately.
Anyway, even this thing is not done. You cut it in pieces and you use heuristics like BLAST or any other thing, and it's maybe not precise, but good enough for practical application. However, it does not work in 2 dimensions because the time required for the matching is exponential.
Right. So, but for the perfect match. But on the other hand, do we need perfect match? No. The colors of pixels are determined up to the quantization of the acquisition anyway. A to D devices has famous noise. So in reality, you're looking at something which does have already, some fuzzy notion. So what if you will go instead for the epsilon accuracy? Once you allow it, then the method becomes a little bit easier, and it becomes essentially a giant spectral analysis problem. What you do now, you try to arrange your image into a bunch of the subtiles, small. The largest would be like 8 by 8 pixel. And then you simply go through the list of tiles on one or another, and you try to create matching, following some reasonable recipes.
You introduce another metric, you do quadratic.
Right. Not L1, but L2. And if you want to be even more accurate, what you really want to do is actually go for the correlation, like almost statistical correlation. In this case, it's actually covariance, which was a little bit more accurate measure, where you take out the mean and you do the comparison. So by doing this thing, you have now a complete atlas of tile to tile in these overlap areas. And if you combine it also with the feature analysis, which is important, and you do it by various linear and nonlinear filters, you actually create a complete and very useful mapping, point-to-point mapping from one overlap area to another. And then, of course, you try to make it into the global and nice continuous mapping, which you do using Delano triangulation, which basically you're picking up feature points and so on, and you create triangles where the movement, mapping from one triangle to another is determined by this subtitle correspondence. The number of triangles is reasonable per overlap images, so you end up at the end with about 1 million triangles this way processed. And what it means in terms of alteration of the image? Well, we actually had to change about 3% of all the pixels. But look what we actually getting. This is the funniest thing is, there is really no unique picture of unicorn which you will reconstruct this way. Since unicorn is not solid, every of the shots was correct. We are not correcting anything. What we are trying to find out is essentially a consistent picture of the unicorn between all those minute changes which were done when the shots were
because done. Even when the thing hung vertically under the feature of gravity, everyone not only see unicorn with his own eyes, but he sees a different unicorn, because depending on the time of a day, light, humidity, and wind, and by the way, if you go in summer to Cloisters, there is quite a pronounced, very pleasant wind in uptown Manhattan. So it's everybody is right, and in reality, it's sort of rather ephemeral thing. Yeah. So basically, what was very striking that we had to process each pixel individually, and there are billions of them, and they had to be done many, many times at a time. Yeah. And it was a very unpleasant thing, really, to develop the technology and then to process even with a lot of computer power. And after that,
so something happened. You see, we actually did not look much on the pictures themselves because the computer did all the work. So the computer assembled the thing at the end, and as far as the statistical analysis shows, it was just great. So we looked at it on our computer screen. It actually was good on our computer screen. And then guys from Maths printed on the really, really, really big printer, and it was not okay at all. So let me try to.
Well, basically, the thing is the following one. Matt wanted to show it on some big show. They printed it on unholy size. They printed it on unholy size printer, and here comes.
So here we can correct everything related to the overlap. But it turned out, it's another problem when you do time-lapse panoramic view, that when they were doing shots, they were unable to give the same lightening condition on each shot.
You have to realize when the thing is lying there for months, somebody at some point will come in, open the door, open the window, will let the beam of light, will use a flash bulb, something will flash in a corridor. You don't know.
So look at this tile. You can actually see the boundary of the tile very well. This is most likely the reconstruction shows that what happened is that somebody opened a door somewhere on the back of the room while the shot was taking place.
And the parallel beam of light went in and totally killed the color.
Right. So here comes the problem, right? This is actually a tile completely different from all other tiles. The fact that there is some overlap is essentially irrelevant. We don't have a second tile to compare it with and find out what was the real color. So that actually was the most interesting challenge.
However, God was kind to us. The thing was photographed on both sides.
Yes.
The back side of the tapestry have not seen the sunlight for 500 years. The colors were absolutely vibrant, and there were screw-ups in other places because somebody opened something else there.
Right.
But
not
here.
in the same tile. Right.
So we were able to use this, and this is why we think that our digital unicorn, which obviously use the colors from the back to do right thing
So
on the front,
that's a real
is looking definitely better, in our opinion.
What we had to do, we basically did a gamma correction on pixel per pixel point. Again, computer found out the best gamma correction map and did it. Now, this is funny because, again, let's compare it with John Henry approach. So imagine a photographer will be given the same thing. Photographer essentially will do the same thing as we do. You know, in old days it was called simply retouching. Now it's photoshopping or whatever it is. The only difference is that this, again, difference between serial and parallel approach. When photographer does it, or simple program in Photoshop, you basically go through the menu or write your own plugins, which says, you know, in this case, change the gamma component, change intensity, do some sort of other filtering operation. This cannot be done here. It really had to be done on pixel per pixel basis. So, you know, so that's one win for the parallel approach. So anyway, at the end, it was fine. It looked like it was supposed to look like. But, you know, that's a close call. Doing time-lapse panoramic view can be dangerous. So one of the best examples would be if you want to capture some famous landmark and you did some of the pictures in the morning and some of the pictures at night, well, you actually will have serious difficulties for the same reason.
Or even, you know, Manet was capturing shades of light on his ponds. He never got it there. But even here we are, you know, facing the same thing. Well, let us look on the parallel between the art and computing. And many years ago, we talked with a friend of ours who was working in computer graphics then, and we asked him, what would be your computational requirements for graphic? And he said, I want a cray for every pixel. Well, by the way, it is a modest thing, because when you start doing parallel processing, this looks like really very miserly thing.
And I think the future actually lies in this approach. If you look at your game engines, you know, your game accelerators, they're already doing per pixel operations, which 20 years ago nobody would ever think would be done. It does huge number of floating point operations per pixel. It's certainly not a cray, but I think that's where the development is.
But also you have to realize another thing, that in order to present even unicorn to you, not on a computer screen, but say in a printed form, there is a thing called dithering, or what electrical engineers call delta sigma process. In order to be effective in this, you should be able to do the dithering in a parallel way. However, all existing technology,
good technology
for printing and whatever, is such that we have no idea how to do it in parallel, because it is non-linear and self sort of perpetuating thing. The moment you change something in one area, like with unicorn, it falls apart totally in the other area. So we are facing really conceptual algorithmic problem, which we absolutely have no idea whether it's head or tail. Now, you can, of course, say this is all beautiful, it is art, it is science, and as they say, who needs it and what is this for the economy? Well, or let us say for the human betterment. And my answer is actually a lot. I'm sure that you are not familiar with the thing which is called registration of medical imaging. But let me put it to you in a very stark term. You know, we deal with people who do medical imaging. And they do a lot of medical imaging. So you go in there, they do MRI of your brain. Resolution is not a prima, but anyway. So then you go and do the MRI, say, half a year later or 1 year later. Unless you have some gross thing, like half of the brain is gone. Unfortunately, it is also a problem. You cannot do anything because brain is three-dimensional. Brain is a jelly. It depends on time of the day, on your blood pressure, on the temperature, and on your position. You never lie in the, machine in the same position, unless you can provide the putting mosaic together in a precise way. All this beautiful imaging is not worth a warm spell.
Well, in terms of the analysis of
analysis.
development.
And there is another interesting thing. After the age of 50, and some say after the age of 30, we lose on average 1.5% of the brain matter a year. This thing is replaced by water. So it's very visible. So it's very interesting, of course, for people, particularly for, like in case of New York, for high-powered Wall Street executives, to find out where exactly they are getting water on the brain.
Right.
I'm not kidding.
Right. So in other words, co-registration is useful, right? So let's actually go to this question which we formulated before. So this actually, so these problems are interesting. There is something to that. What worries us more is that, in fact, we are not seeing too many such applications. Oops. I'm sorry. That's a good point. Oh. Okay. We don't see too many applications where the parallel machines can be as useful as the parallel photography. Of course, photography itself is an extremely interesting example of extremely parallel, and I would even say embarrassingly parallel problem. Because when photons hit the glass or plate or film, they do it completely independently from each other. So photography itself is a parallel enterprise. Processing imaging is an excellent example for parallelism. Interestingly enough, there is really not that many examples where massive parallelism can be really useful for truly important human applications. So that's actually a question to the audience. Do you know of any other such applications? Yep, sorry. All right, so the last thing we would like to mention is a kind of parallelism, again, between parallel machines and building some large parallel image acquisition thing. There's a lot of area similarities there. One of them, and the most interesting, is heat dissipation. If you want to assemble a very large parallel image acquisition, for example, for astronomical needs, one of the problems you will hit will be the heat removal.
Because you see, in astronomy, if you are not outside the atmosphere and you are inside, you have obviously a lot of atmospheric and other effects. So, and in order to get anything meaningful, you have to keep your digital CCDs, which is the same chips, at liquid helium temperature. So here you are removing heat this way. In case of the computers we are building it now, the heat dissipation is in megawatts, and I'm not kidding. Yeah. And in addition to that, you have problem of wires. Basically, the size of your, and this exacerbates the heat problem because the wires, 1 foot of wire in a sort of free space is 1 nanosecond. So you cannot allow a skew more than 1 nanosecond. Actually, you cannot allow for even fraction of a nanosecond because your device will be useless. However, on a chip, because of the dielectric properties, as resistance and capacitance, sometimes you cannot afford a millimeter between the elements because it will be also a nanosecond. So it is really
So in other words, if you're building parallel machine, you better find some good application for them. So again, parallel imaging is a very good application. And it would be very, I would say, remarkable for us and very good if anybody in the audience will come with some other ideas how parallel machines can be used in a peaceful way. Okay.
I'm Richard Anders. I'm a trustee at the Science Museum. I have a tremendous passion for and a nodding knowledge of math that goes back about 30 years, so I don't think I remember anything. But I was asked who might be a good person to moderate a presentation with the Chudnovskys, and for a little bit of head scratching, I came up with the person who I'm going to introduce tonight. There's a bunch of stuff I got here. I'm introducing Amir Axel. He said there's really no way that I can pronounce his name wrong. He won't be mad at me whatever I say. So, Amir received his A.B. in mathematics and his M.S. in operations research and his Ph.D. from Oregon, and he's written books, and he's a visiting scholar at Harvard University's Department of the History of Science, and he's frequent contributor to the New York Times and been on the CBS News and CNN and CNBC and Nightline and lectures and all of that stuff. But I first heard about Amir when I was browsing through the bookstore one day, and I came across a book that said, How to Beat the IRS at Its Own Game, Surviving and Winning a Tax Audit. Now I thought, this is the kind of guy for me. He apparently had deconstructed the discriminant function that the IRS had developed that was used to determine who was cheating on their taxes and who wasn't. And I think, by the way, there's no coincidence. That was in 1995, and as you'll all recall, the next several years were a wild frenzy of speculation and tax evasion and all of that stuff, and I think that your book... Then I'd periodically go to the bookstore and I'd see a book not about beating the IRS, but about real-life stuff like Fermat's Last Theorem, which was nominated for a Los Angeles Times Book Award, or a book like Pendulum, or Descartes' Secret Notebook. I'd see all these great books about science, and I'd say, darn it, he is doing what I want to do, because I'd love to write about science, but he's actually doing it. And so when he appeared at the local bookstore to talk about a book, I thought, I have to come and meet him. And I did, and we had a great time. He's the nicest gentleman you could imagine. We went over to his house one time, and he kept saying, do you want some books? Do you want some of my books? So I said, great, some books from Dr. Axel. That would be great. I got a Turkish copy of Descartes' Secret Notebook. I got a Polish version of Fermat's Last Theorem. But Dr. Axel is a great writer, mathematician in his own right, and it's my pleasure to introduce him.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Lisa, and the board for inviting me here. It's really a pleasure to be here and a great honor to be with these two great mathematicians. When Richard first suggested that I do this, I started reading up about what the Chudnovsky brothers had done, and I was reminded of a New Yorker cartoon. Only people my age and older still remember IBM cards. That's how we used to do computing 40 years ago. So you'd go to a computer center and type these cards that look, I'm explaining to the younger people, these kinds of cards are about this size. And each card was a command, and you'd get a whole deck, and you put it in a box and submit it to be run. Of course, the computer had less power than your PC here, and it ran many jobs at the same time. So there's this cartoon in the New Yorker a long time ago, and it shows this guy typing his IBM cards. And right in front of him, there's this huge sign that says, please do not use our computer to compute pi to 1 billion digits. And that's exactly what these two gentlemen did. They computed pi to 1.011 billion. Is that right? Yeah. 1.011 billion digits. So the next thing that came to my mind is, why? What would you do with 1 billion digits? Store them in your garage, sell them on eBay? So I started researching this problem further, and I found out that the Chudnovsky's brothers are a little too modest, and they didn't tell us that they actually hold several world records for computing pi. Now, the story is that, I should tell you something about pi and its computation. First, it was known to the Babylonians as 3.125, to the Egyptians as 3.16. The Chinese knew it to about 3. And in the the first book of Kings, it says that pi was, it doesn't say pi, but gives the circumference of some circle and the diameter. And if you divide, you see it's 3 times as much. So people have been interested in pi since, at least 2000 BC. Archimedes knew it to 3.1418, and so on to our time. In the year 1701, 100 digits of pi were known. And in 1949, the first computer, ENIAC, was used to, you're nodding, how many digits?
I don't remember.
2,037 digits. So this was the first computer use of, first use of computer to finding digits of pi. And then a Japanese fellow by the name of Yasumasa Kanada, not Canada with a K, Kanada started working on pi, and he used a Hitachi computer in Japan, and he started getting all these records, 100 million.
And he holds it now. We're out of the business for the last 14, 15
I
years.
know.
So Canada is now holding his own record and beating it to you.
The only thing, as you understand, the competition was slightly unequal because the cache in his machine was 2 terabytes. And I don't think that the United States at that time could. By the way, it was the only machine, and he used slave labor.
Well,
His team was sleeping under the desk.
Anyway, it was interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. So I once, during computer exhibit, was caught inside the Hitachi supercomputer looking at the cooling system. It was a lunch break, so the younger guys let me in. But when the supervisor came, he probably killed them. No, we could not afford this either. So you understand, I was inside there.
They're too modest. So, so this guy, Kanada, with his team, they keep churning these records, 200 million, 300 million, and suddenly, out of nowhere, he's shocked. One day he comes in, he's just about to have a heart attack. He finds out that 2 Americans who immigrated from Ukraine 1977 or 77 worked in their house, built a supercomputer that competes with his Hitachi, and got a record before him.
Actually, the first we did him was 500 million digit, and we did it actually on conventional machines. One of them was IBM mainframe, and another was Cray. So it was kind of
right. By the way, it was technically the first calculation when the thing was calculated on machines of different architecture. Because before it was just 2 serial calculations.
But anyway, this was way too complicated because to get time to all those machines, we had to get money, permissions, begging. It was so much easier just to have your own computer. So anyway, as a stunt, it was actually quite good. But there was mathematics behind it. It was not quite a stunt. There was really 3 reasons why we were doing it. One of them is, in fact, we actually do, in the normal life, we are doing number theory. And the pi is a very nice constant. In fact, the most favorite constant for so-called transcendental number theory and others. It is the most famous constant to be proved transcendental, not the first one. Primarily because of the squaring of the circle. Transcendence of pi means that you can't actually square the circle. It was a proof of Lindemann about
1582.
130 years ago. And we still don't know much about the arithmetic properties of pi. So that's actually a very interesting problem. So what we did, we were trying to find good rational approximation to pi. Because arithmetic properties basically, the number is transcendental, which means you cannot write it as a finite fraction. Okay? So far so easy. But if you write pieces of fraction, how closely you will match the pi. The way how you match it, in this infinite approach, but not quite reaching it, is called the rate of rational approximation. And the problem of transcendental number theory is to find an exact rate of approximation of a number by rational, which is more or less its unique signature. So we don't actually know much about the pi. We know a little bit, but not much. So one of the things was very interesting approximation using so-called modular functions. Something related to interesting identity studied by Ramanujan, if that name means something to people in the audience. So we had some particular approximation related to Ramanujan one. So that's actually reason number one. We came up with a formula. It would be cool to use it. The second thing is that the formula actually had a counterpart, so-called p-adic thing. So in other words, okay, you compute your pi, right, up to the billion digits. How do you know that you're right? So Canada did a very simple thing. He runs the computation always twice. The idea is that computer malfunctioned during the operation, and it would, because even if you have a memory with error correction, the amount of time during which the computer ran possibly will make double error mistake, and in this case something will go wrong.
However, from the primary point of view, and we had a horrible proof of it, it does not prove anything because the hardware in computer could be miswired.
Right.
And this was, and this was one of the things we discovered during our calculation using other people's hardware.
Right, so the most interesting thing would be if you actually will have a test. So think about when you send a giant email, right? Imagine that something is wrong in the transmission, your file will be corrected. That is why you might know that there are people usually attach keys. Typically it's done using MD5, which is really not a good thing. It's a signature. So apparently this particular formula that we use for pi has this p-adic version, which means that by taking modular operations, reducing it modular set and primes, you would actually be able to get this modular signature exactly. It's a very nice number related to the properties of elliptic curves. Nice thing. So since this formula has a wonderful counterpart, it actually made only a lot of sense to use the formula to run the computation to check that it's accurate. That was the third most interesting reason. At that time, we needed computers for a lot of things. So nothing is better than pi to give a very good test to the computer. It's almost like a stress test. If you want to know if your computer is going to basically get a heart attack at some point, you better run it through. So it's actually an excellent test. It is used occasionally on large computers simply as a benchmark and verification test. So sorry about this.
No, good. I want you to speak, not me. This is your show. Maybe I should make a comment. Some of you know a lot of mathematics and some not. Gregory mentioned Ramanujan, who's a very famous Indian mathematician who died tragically of TB while very young. And he was a friend of Hardy, another very well-known British mathematician, G.H. Hardy. And while he was dying, Hardy came to see him, and he didn't know what to say. And he said, I came in a cab, and these are number theorists. So Ramanujan was actually known to believe to have had a personal relationship with every one of the integers. So Hardy comes in and says, well, I came in a cab and had a very boring number. You know what the number was. 1729. And Ramanujan was dying, jumped up in bed and said, no, Hardy, no, Hardy. It's a very interesting number. It's the smallest number expressible as the sum of two cubes in two different ways. So when you go home, you can try it. It's actually not hard at all. One of the numbers is very nice number. So try it at home. Cubes, two cubes added together to give you 1729. And of course, Ramanujan worked a lot about numbers. On numbers. He was a number theorist, and he came up with an equation which I understand you changed and improved. And again, their modesty is preventing them from saying that their algorithm, which is an adaptation of a very long formula, I asked for this so I can write it, but I won't. It's a very long formula. The Chudnovsky formula is the fastest algorithm for pi. And I understand that
for this type of class, because there are a variety of different
the algorithm used by Professor Kanada has to do with the arctangent function, which is not converges much slower.
Well, he also uses algorithm, the so-called Salamin algorithm, which actually was developed in MIT in the old AI lab as a byproduct of something else. And it's a kind of a cool algorithm of its own. It's a little bit different. It's not based on the series. But we do have some attraction to the series expansion.
So now I have to tell you about a rumor. I talked to a lot of mathematicians before coming here because as soon as I remembered that cartoon and that whole infatuation with pi, I couldn't sleep at night, and I think it's been 2 weeks now I've been studying pi, and I talked to a lot of mathematicians, and the rumor is that you have a secret about pi, that you learned something about pi that you're not saying and you're not publishing and you're going to keep. So I called the math police, and they're behind these doors. And you can't leave until you tell us that secret.
Sorry.
No, we can tell you a very simple thing. Pi is probably the most perfect random number generator
in terms of its expansion.
In terms of its expansion. And here lies a very interesting conundrum, as they say in economics. You have an explicit formula, and you basically get a random number.
Which actually raises a very interesting question. Does the positional system even make any sense? So, as you know, we use positional system purely historical. Other civilizations use different systems. Like, potentially, if Chinese would really go all the way with their method, it would be completely different mixed triadic representation. But something is really funny about the fact that positional system of such an interesting number, from all point of view, produces truly sequence of very well distributed random numbers, which means that converting something to a positional system most likely creates garbage out of otherwise very interesting information.
Yes, but how to find a system of coordinates in which pi will sort of give away its structure? That is a very tough thing to...
There are various ways of writing it as some infinite series, and none of them is satisfactory. There's another constant you might have of E, so-called the base of the natural logarithm. And it's a completely different number. It has some representation in which it's very naturally reveals its arithmetic properties. E, for example, is not an interesting number from arithmetic point of view at all. We know everything about it because there's so-called continued fraction expansion of E, which was, we can attribute it to Euler, which is like almost 250 years ago. However, if you look at the digit expansion of E, other than the first 2,000 digits, which are completely regular in some sense, after that it again goes off and
what do you mean by regular?
Well, there's an old Russian joke. A guy was asked on the exam on math to tell the value of E. So he actually glided very rapidly, at least for 10 digits, and they asked him how he knows. Well, he said it's actually quite easy.
Yeah, it's a price of half a liter of vodka to the power of quarter of a liter.
But if you look at the
it's
expansion,
true.
But if you look at the expansion, you will see, for example, immediately the repeating of 1828, 1828. It's twice Leo Tolstoy. It's the birthday of Leo Tolstoy. Yeah, something is very weird in the first 2,000.
So we are not trying to do any codes in the numbers.
It's simply the ways how the E is actually written in terms of continued fraction expansion forces leading digits to more or less be determined analytically. But unfortunately, the higher you go, those higher digits basically conspire with each other and produce a mess. This is a problem with counting with carries. People usually think, well, in the high school I had this problem and then I forgot about it. Well, counting with carry is a very complicated thing. The carry has tendency to go up and up and up and up and up. And it's enough to have a little slip somewhere, and the positional system will completely betray. Positional system really collects all these digits in some very strange apparatus. So anyway.
You mentioned, was it a Russian mathematician who he memorized phi, 1.618, etc., to 10 digits.
Yeah, they do it, just apparently anybody can do it.
Yeah.
The only thing
Did you know that a Japanese person named Hiroyaki Goto memorized 42,000 digits of pi?
That is sick. That's fine. No, this is fun. It's a remarkable achievement. It shows that the capacity of brain is huge.
Well, actually, pi has other weird things about it. In 1897, the Indiana state legislature decided to legislate the value of pi. And they wanted it to be 16 divided by the square root of 3, which is 9.23. Not even close. In the last minute, I guess, this legislature was changed. So pi remained to be computed. But I actually read an article about you in the New Yorker that said that while you were computing pi, you were demanding more digits and more digits. So you must have been finding something there.
What was interesting initially was you can actually get any interesting statistical analysis out of it. And it turned out the best statistical test we could come up with required basically astonishing number of digits.
It's so-called iterated logarithm. So you basically take the logarithm of the exponential, which means that bazillions of this stuff are not going to provide you with any. That if any insight comes, it will be analytic.
Yeah,
it won't be
most likely it won't be numeric. But,
which is why I asked you why you need a billion digits, because
I
like to think of it analytically.
The idea was that, hey, maybe there will be billion digits, something interesting will come out of it. And nothing did.
But it was not done for this purpose.
No.
But
what is interesting is that there are some other representation of pi, particularly, the fellow who really had most insight in this was Bill Gosper. He was one of the original so-called hackers, again, MIT AI lab. So Bill always had an idea that if you look at the continued fraction expansion, which is a little bit different representation, you might get some insight. So there was a sense of computing pi to get this thing out. It also does help in some actually theorem proving, because there are always exceptional cases in the small numbers where theorems really don't reach, and you have to do a numerical analysis. So one can with some heavy twisting, one can come up with some argument why such large computation of pi does make sense. Especially if you did it, then you have to come up with some justification. But to be honest, whatever we looked at did not provide anything particularly useful, other than just a large database. There are occasional claims from different people that somehow expansionist pi is a little bit different. But most of the claims that I have seen are based on inadequate or insufficient statistical analysis. They do appear from time to time. The most recent was about a year and a half ago in connection with an attempt to understand what means true randomness. Because you see, digits of pi by definition cannot be random. And the definition is not because pi has a simple formula. No. Pi is a unique number. So a unique sequence is not random. Random is random. So these guys studied some physical problem, and they came with the conclusion that pi is not random enough from their point of view. But again, they used inadequate statistics.
I think it's worth mentioning one more thing about pi that relates it to Richard Feynman, the famous American physicist. He found out that the 762nd digit of pi is a 9, and so are the following 5. And he tried to memorize 762 digits so he could say pi is equal to 3.145, et cetera, and then say 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, et cetera. But he never could do it. But I want to ask you, let's leave pi alone then. You should tell Mr. Kanada, though, that there's no reason to continue. Apparently he's at 1.241 trillion.
No, there is actually reason to continue because of the hardware. The computation of expansion of pi has to track the hardware development. Because it's a very good test for the computer and also shows the power of it. So if you actually track the computation of pi versus the Moore's law, it actually very well matches. So expect for the bigger computer, bigger computation of pi. And what you don't actually see is the cases when computation of pi results in the hardware error. That will not be published. But I can tell you this is a very common occurrence.
Quite frequent.
So there is a reason to do it.
Well, I understand we're running out of time, and I have to stop. But before that, I have one thing I want to say to you. I know you're working on another supercomputer. Please do not sell it to the IRS.
No, I assure you that IRS can do their job with abacus.
Maybe more efficient.
Or by throwing the darts. No, they don't need this kind of thing.
So we're going to open this up to the audience for questions. I'm getting a little arm twisting from Richard Andrews. He says he has a really good question, so we'll start with him.
I didn't say I had a really good question. No, I mean, I had an observation. My wife comes into my messy office, and I've been quoting the Chudnovskys frequently. She comes into my incredibly messy office and says, when are you going to clean that up, and when are you going to repair the window? And I say, shh, I'm building a supercomputer out of spare parts in my office. Leave me alone. I have a question for you, as bad as it is. You were telling me before about embarrassingly parallel problems, which basically are completely independent and can be done completely independently. And you two kind of are a parallel processor yourself. You're a parallel processing. You're doing these projects. I don't know if you're embarrassingly parallel or you work closely, but
You might be embarrassingly.
what are your strengths and weaknesses as you attack a problem together?
It depends on the problem.
It depends on the problem.
But you look at the problem and try to sort of, you see there is a famous joke that it is very difficult to do the original classical problem. Whatever came down from Diophantus, Archimedes, Chebyshev, but by little rotation of the problem, you rotate it, not in your mind, but in setting, and it immediately gives beautiful solution.
Not to the original.
Not to the original, but it's close enough. So you rotate the problem and see, whatever. Either you can do something original, or you can rotate it to the state where it will sort of be more tractable.
Yes? Okay.
Hi. I'm curious about the use of a pixel and the idea of rows and columns. And I'm wondering if you think that pixels are kind of a primitive way to think about images, just because you have objects, not objects, backgrounds.
Yeah, well, pixel is a very good way of representation if you have a little dot of phosphor on the screen. So I think pixel is just a function of the technology. And it does create all sorts of problems, like David mentioned, the dithering. When you want to quantize the information, you basically have to assign to something continuous those bunch of discrete values. So that is a problem.
Of course, I think there are a couple of the guys in the audience who are trying to create, displays with billions of pixels. Then you will obviously be better off. If in the privacy of your home, you would be able to see.
Yeah, ultimately you
pixels.
want not to see pixel. I think that's the point. So you want to have pixels as many as possible, and then not to see it. Basically, it all goes to the same thing. Do you really want spatial information about the image or not? We personally prefer spectral information about the image.
And they are living creatures which actually operate in a spectral domain.
Yes, but so if given a choice, I would rather prefer like similar to the synthetic aperture radar information. That would be cool. Unfortunately, with our poor eyesight system, we still have to convert it to pixels at some point.
I would like to say I've been terribly impressed by so many things I didn't understand, but I do understand that you two gentlemen are brothers.
Yes.
And I would like to know if you could comment on your mathematical heritage, or did you just appear two brothers, seems like an extremely small probability, without a huge mathematical heritage?
the mathematical brothers are not uncommon.
For example, Bernoulli brothers.
Bernoulli, one of the most famous, it actually was family. Bernoulli family produced an incredible crop of mathematicians, though it was several centuries ago. Our father and mother were actually engineers. And to be honest, looking back, we feel very, very sorry that we did not exploited their knowledge more because of engineering. So that's a regret which we have. Possibly we could have benefited tremendously.
I apologize if this is a dumb question, but I'm not a math guy. I'm wondering if there's an elegant known relationship between E and pi?
Yes, there's a classical, which people always put, the classical Euler formula, e to the power pi times I equals minus 1. And that actually is very useful for proving all sorts of properties about pi. But this is a very weak formula. The transcendental numbers deal with the issues of the relation between numbers. Numbers which are connected by algebraic relation called algebraically dependent. So we have no idea whether E and pi are algebraically dependent. Of course, everything tells us that they are not. But we don't know anything about the algebraic relation between E and pi. The only result we have in the kind of similar venue would be, for example, that pi and e to the power pi, not e to the power pi I, but e to the power pi are algebraically independent. This is actually our result of some 30-something years ago. But it's very, very difficult to put in one basket E and pi. They really come from two completely different worlds in a sense.
Well, could I give an example? Actually, the normal curve does have both E and pi. 1 over square root 2 pi integral of e to the minus.
But you start having exponent.
That's right.
So if you just come up with something where there is just clean e and clean pi in the same.
Although, let me add something about that formula for people who don't know the history of mathematics. That particular formula is usually written as e to the I pi plus 1 equals 0. And it was considered the most beautiful. You know that because you're experts on beautiful formulas, for which we need another 2 hours, Richard. So at any rate, e to the I pi plus 1 equals 0 is considered the most beautiful formula because it has the natural numbers e, the natural number pi, I, which is the basis for complex numbers, 1, which is the basis for r, for the real numbers. It has plus, it has equal, it has 0, and it has multiplication and exponentiation. So it has basically the whole basics of our number system within the complex plane. I wanted to add something else about E and pi. I understand that nobody knows whether E plus pi is transcendental or not, which I think is a very interesting.
Yeah, which is a part of this algebraic dependency. So we actually have no idea. It's actually very hard to prove. It will be very hard to prove compared to some other stuff.
I was wondering if you could describe a bit about how you went about building your computer?
The old one, that was actually easy. The new one which we are working on would be much harder. It would be very, very hot. The usual problem which we are facing everywhere is the heat removal, heat dissipation. The stuff is very hot because frequency of the operations are very high. I mean,
also, the power density is very high because you have to pack the stuff very close together. Otherwise, the speed of light will kill you.
That's a real problem. If you spread if you look at the traditional computer room, it have a bunch of the boxes spread apart. One of the reasons is that it allows normal air conditioning system to remove the heat. When the first what would be like supercomputer today were built by IBM, they actually had already used water as a cooling mechanism for their first real powerful mainframes. And we are back to this days.
Seymour Cray used Freon. And it was like 12 tons of Freon. So you can make an ozone hole with one hole in a Cray. Yeah. And I once had the privilege of instantly standing in Freon up to my knees when the thing,
Yeah,
there was a little hole.
And what is the future, by the way? If you look at for those who like gaming laptops, inside your gaming laptops there are already water cooling solutions. They're usually called heat pipes. So there's an ingenious device which uses water.
At a very low pressure in a hermetically sealed thing, which instantly evaporates. And the problem with this thing, we seriously looked at it in our design, and it is quite good for a single processor.
Right.
However, it's not ready for prime time with tens of thousands of processors because it's not reliable and it also crosses.
But there are other solutions. Cray, for example, sprays Freon directly on the surface of the chip. This is in their new machines. It's extremely expensive and complicated.
But there are other plumbing ways which are not as exotic.
Yeah, but essentially water. Water is the best.
Am I live? Okay. You asked a while back for potential applications of massive parallel computing.
Yes.
I have one. It seems to me that the mathematical literature itself is a complete mess, filled with mistakes and redundancies. But we're in an era now where people are starting to scan the classic literature, digitize it, and if there were some artificial intelligence, massively parallel approach to creating an expert system, something like a search engine that would regularize all the notations, check for inconsistencies, and let people easily see what was known and what wasn't known, I think that would be a great help to mathematics and hence to the world.
Yes.
We agree with you, and if you can help develop this system, we will provide the platform.
Right. There are some interesting aspects of what you're saying. Not the least of them is the version of the mathematical OCR, which is actually a very non-trivial problem for a variety of reasons.
For example, yes, the scanning of mathematical literature is an atrocious problem, and there is basically no hope. We try to do it,
it's quite hard.
But no, I'm not trying to disparage you. I really appreciate this. This would be very important. Right. But, however, it is, for example, let me give you another example. I don't know whether Stephen Wolfram is still in the audience.
I think you're away. Otherwise, he would have not.
So there is a very interesting trade-off.
Right.
It is assumed in business that technology will survive if it has a productivity of a steam engine. At least some venture capitalists think this way. So if your coefficient of useful action is above 2%, maybe it's worth as a long shot to fund it. However, our productivity in programming is not even the steam engine capability.
Especially for parallel
for parallel computing. It's really a horrible thing, and it's solved always in Chinese army approach. You see, however, there is a difference in this madness between Japan and United States, which are the only two countries who devote considerable portion of their R&D budget to this. You see, Japanese machines, for historical reason, are vector machines. So the length of your loop is like 10,000 or 100,000, which in Japanese rendition of the operation, it reflects both in hardware and software. So the largest Japanese machine is called Air Simulator. It's a beautiful structure, a dream of the union labor and everything else. It's 3 football fields long. It's 20 stories deep. So you took the largest supercomputers, you put them in a grid, you wire them in a transparent way. The maintenance is a pleasure. It's not the issue which we have to deal with it, and we cannot even get a finger in. Okay, then how it is operated? You don't have 10,000 people now, but Hitachi and others have thousands of people. Each of them does this loop. So it's done a human way. And the results are not bright.
Yeah, so the solution that's what David mentions, Wolfram and his program Mathematica. So imagine, right, that you will program it not a conventional way using horrible languages like C, but in a naive and scientifically clean way using computer algebra system, symbolic manipulation system. If you will try to run it on a conventional machine, you will get a huge factor of degradation in performance.
You basically will degrade not by 3 orders of magnitude.
Yes, but on the other hand, imagine that you're using it on these giant parallel machines, which is, hundreds of thousands more powerful than normal desktop. Losing even 3 orders of magnitude in performance would still put you ahead
in productivity, because basically anybody algebraically literate could sit at the machine and instantly be productive. However, the biggest point of this is that you would be able to debug a very simple problem in a transparent way.
So maybe the future of parallel architecture lies not in the efficient use of it, but in extraordinarily inefficient use of it. But that's kind of a sad statement. Who wants to build a petaflop machine and ultimately run it on a gigaflop rate?
Well, it's better than to have a petaflop machine and, warm the universe.
I have a question about parallel processing as it relates to individual pixels and how that might relate to medical imaging, specifically diagnostic radiology, CT or MRI.
Yes, that's the only application, unfortunately, we see right now.
The MRI.
The amount of computation is phenomenal.
Look, even here you have a big psychological problem. For example, it took us a couple of years to convince investigative radiologists whom we know for 20 years that real-time MRI processing of the imaging makes sense. Because they say, well, we take a frame, we load it on a workstation, we go out, we take coffee. We come back, we look at it. So I said, and imagine you are doing the surgery in an MRI machine, you make a cut, you go take a coffee, you come back, you make another cut.
Yeah.
So
it's possible that might revive an interest in parallel computing, because parallel computing is having a problem like a chicken and egg syndrome. There is no available parallel hardware reasonable chip because there is no parallel programs that you can run on it. And there is no parallel programs because there is really no platforms in which you can execute it.
But really, MRI, even in its horrible form now, a cube 256 by 256, the amount of computation definitely dwarfs Moore's law.
Yeah.
So this means no matter how fast your computer industry would churn its chips, even at this resolution, you will be always very substantial.
This is why you see the amount of computation with the linear size of the image in the MRI goes like n to the power 5. So if you if you want to double your resolution, you actually will have to do 32 times more computation. So demand for the compute in the medical imaging is, like David said, growing faster than the Moore's law, and that's where the parallel machines might come up. But again, it will also take a leap of faith by people who use this machine to say that I actually want to use it live or interactive.
I have a strange question. I'm not even sure how to frame it. But I've heard people say that because computers can use the traditional solutions of series expansion, whatever, that the interest in theoretical mathematics and mathematics that might be able to look a little bit further than just digital machines is suffering. It doesn't have the support it used to.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to tell, about 25 years ago, we had a lot of colleagues who simply said that this is just a bad mathematics to use computers. However, I noticed that some of these people later on actually started using it themselves. The reason why you would like to use them anyway, and it does help you a lot, is because of the complexity of thinking and operation, which you otherwise would do on a piece of paper. One of the early computer algebra systems with which we were involved for many years was simply called Sketchpad. And basically the purpose of it to allow you to do complexity of algebraic operations, which you otherwise will spend pages and pages. If you look at the classical papers of, for example, Cayley or other great...
Or Gauss.
Yeah, so German or British mathematicians, especially algebraic geometry, it's a remarkable feat of hand symbolic computation. So imagine that Gauss, right, would have had a computer in his disposal. I think that we would see phenomenal results.
You see, basically, computer is not some kind of sacred object. No. It's a hammer. It's a tool.
It's very primitive so far.
One uses it to get some feel. You see, astronomers don't need the database. If they can stick the telescope out, it will come to them. Physicists don't need the database. If they build their accelerator, you know, the unholy amount of data will come to them. Photographers also don't need it. They we operate with the stuff which, of course, exists in our head, but our head was limited.
It has to be exposed.
We need the database. There are definitely people who can see it without it, but even Gauss, if you look at reciprocity laws and others, he covered, books with calculation, and then he was coming to some plausible conclusions. There is a beautiful book of Poya called Mathematics and Plausible Reasoning. Gabor Poya.
I know inequalities.
So basically, it's a great book. We have a friend who gave it to all the residents in medicine. He is a doctor. Because this explains to you how to form the plausible reasoning. It's like, the famous anecdote, how an engineer proves that all numbers are prime. 1 is prime, 2 is prime, 3 is prime, 4 is an exception, 5 is prime. Get lost.
So you need a little bit bigger database. So I don't know. I think that the modern mathematics actually, it already benefits a lot from the computer.
I agree with what you're saying, but I want to bring another point, which is, if I could take your question and sort of break it into two questions. The real world, what's important to us in the real world, and what's important in mathematics. And what's important in pure mathematics most often cannot be done by computer. And the best example is from Maslow's theorem. You could try it for n equals 1, 2, 3, 4. You can never prove it. To prove it, you have to do it with pencil and paper, in which case a computer is completely useless.
But for things needed for the proof of it, like modular functions and starting from Beer-Svensson and Dyer conjectures and the Weil-Taniyama conjectures, the existence of the numerics which people did for years was an extremely useful. It allowed people to work on the tool. So ultimately that's the point. Computers, as of this moment, are unable to provide any real help in mathematical proof. The only thing they continue to provide us is an insight, and it's a good trade-off.
Thank you, David and Gregory Chudnovsky and Amir Axel, for that wonderful program. And these fascinating guests will be available downstairs at the reception if you have more questions, which I'm sure many of you do. We want to thank the Lowell Institute for supporting tonight's program. A webcast of the program will be available on the WGBH Forum Network, which also archives many of our past programs. And we hope you will join us next week for the next program in the When Science Meets Art series, when composers Evan Zaporin and Christine Southworth premiere new music to be performed by robots, a 25-piece gamelan, and 4 Western instruments. So tickets and information are available on the museum website, or you can purchase them at the box office. So thank you very much for coming. The reception's on the level downstairs, and hope you enjoyed the program.